People who prefer being alone often have these five rare traits. You scroll through your phone and see everyone posting about parties, meetups, and social events. And somewhere deep inside, you feel nothing. No FOMO, no desire to be there. Just quiet relief that you're home, alone, at peace. If that sounds familiar, I want you to stop whatever you're doing right now, because what I'm about to share might completely change how you see yourself. Society has always painted solitude as something sad, something broken, something that needs fixing. But science, psychology, and the life stories of the world's most successful people tell a completely different story. People who prefer being alone don't just survive. They thrive in ways most people never will. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why your desire for solitude isn't a weakness. It's your greatest hidden advantage. These are the 5 rare traits that people who prefer being alone almost always have. Welcome back to MillionMindShift, the channel where we don't just talk about success, we decode the hidden psychology behind extraordinary people. If you're new here, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now, because we drop content every week that will genuinely shift the way you think, act, and build your life. Now let's talk about something that most people get completely wrong. In a world obsessed with networking, socializing, and being seen, choosing to be alone is almost treated like a character flaw. But here's what nobody tells you. Some of the most brilliant, successful, and emotionally rich people on this planet are deeply private individuals who prefer solitude over social noise. Albert Einstein, J.K. Rowling, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, Warren Buffett, all known for their extraordinary minds, and all known for their love of solitude. That's not a coincidence. That's a pattern. And today, we're going to break down exactly what that pattern looks like. The 5 rare psychological traits that people who prefer being alone almost always carry. Let's get into it. Have you ever sat in silence and felt completely full? Like your own mind was enough company? Like your thoughts were so deep, so layered, so endlessly interesting that you didn't need anyone else to entertain you? If yes, that's trait number 1. People who prefer solitude tend to have what psychologists call a highly developed internal life. Their imagination is vivid. Their thoughts are complex. Their inner world is so rich and so stimulating that the outside world often feels like a distraction from what's happening within. The psychology research in personality psychology shows that introverts, people who prefer alone time, process information more deeply than extroverts. Where an extrovert might skim the surface of an experience, a person who loves solitude dives to the bottom. They analyze, they reflect, they make connections others miss. This is why so many great artists, writers, philosophers, and inventors were deeply solitary people. Nikola Tesla reportedly spent days completely alone, doing nothing but thinking. He said some of his greatest inventions came not from experiments in a lab, but from visions and mental simulations he ran entirely in his mind. That's the power of a rich inner world. What this means for you: if you're someone who loves being alone, your mind is not empty. It's actually overflowing. That inner richness? That's creativity. That's problem-solving ability. That's the kind of deep thinking that builds empires, writes masterpieces, and solves problems that stumped everyone else. The world doesn't need more people who are good at small talk. It needs more people who are brave enough to sit with their own thoughts and actually do something powerful with them. And if that's you, you're already ahead. Trait 2. They have unusually high emotional intelligence. Here's something that will surprise most people. The person sitting quietly in the corner at a party? They're often the most emotionally intelligent person in the room. Not the loudest, not the most charming, not the life of the party. The quiet one, the observer. People who prefer solitude spend enormous amounts of time inside their own emotional landscape. They know what they feel, why they feel it, and how to process it, without needing external validation. The psychology emotional intelligence, or EQ, is made up of 4 core abilities: self-awareness, self-regulation, empathy, and social skill. And here's the thing: 3 of those 4 are developed in silence. Self-awareness is built through reflection, something solitude naturally creates. Self-regulation, the ability to manage your emotions, is strengthened when you regularly spend time alone processing your feelings instead of immediately reacting to them. And empathy, the ability to understand what others are feeling, solitude actually deepens this too. Because when you understand your own emotional world deeply, you naturally become more tuned in to the emotional world of others. Studies show that people who spend regular, intentional time alone report higher levels of empathy, not lower, because they've done the inner work. The real-world impact. Think about the most emotionally intelligent people in your life, the ones who always seem to know the right thing to say, who never seem to overreact, who can walk into a room and read it instantly. I bet at least some of them are quietly private people, ones who don't need to be the center of attention, because they've spent so much time understanding themselves. They understand everyone else too. That's not weakness. That's a superpower. In a world where emotional intelligence is now considered one of the most valuable skills you can have, in leadership, in business, in relationships, the people who prefer solitude are quietly becoming the most valuable people in any room. Trait 3. They are fiercely selective with their energy. Let me ask you something personal. How many times have you said yes to something? A social event, a meetup, a conversation, when every single part of you was screaming no? And how did you feel afterward? Drained, empty, like you gave something away that you can't get back. People who prefer being alone have figured something out that most people spend their entire lives trying to learn. Energy is finite, and it must be protected. The psychology doctor Elaine Aron's groundbreaking research on highly sensitive people, many of whom are introverts, found that solitude-seeking individuals are often more sensitive to stimulation than their extroverted counterparts. This isn't a flaw, it's a calibration. Their nervous systems are finely tuned instruments, and just like a fine instrument, they perform brilliantly when used in the right conditions. Too much noise, too many people, too much social energy, and the signal gets lost. So people who prefer solitude learn, often early in life, to be incredibly selective about where they spend their energy. They don't go to every event. They don't respond to every message immediately. They don't fill every silence with noise. And because of that selectivity, when they do show up, they show up fully, completely, powerfully. The wealth connection. Here's where this gets really interesting for your success and your wealth. Warren Buffett, one of the richest people in human history, is famous for saying that the difference between successful people and really successful people is that really successful people say no to almost everything. That's not an extrovert mindset. That's a solitude mindset. Protecting your energy means protecting your focus. And protecting your focus means protecting your ability to do deep, meaningful, high-value work. Every great achiever, every person who built something extraordinary, did it by saying no to the good things so they could say yes to the great things. If you've always felt guilty for wanting to be alone, I need you to hear this. You're not being antisocial. You're being strategic. Trait 4. They are deeply self-reliant and internally motivated. Here's a question worth sitting with. If no one was watching, no followers, no applause, no recognition, would you still do what you do? For most people, the honest answer is no. They're motivated by external validation, by likes, by approval, by what others think. But people who prefer solitude, they've been practicing something different their whole lives. They've been learning to be their own source of motivation, their own audience, their own judge. The psychologists distinguish between two types of motivation, extrinsic and intrinsic. Extrinsic motivation comes from outside, rewards, recognition, approval. Intrinsic motivation comes from within, genuine passion, personal standards, and the deep satisfaction of doing something well. Research consistently shows that intrinsically motivated people outperform externally motivated people over the long term. They persist longer, they go deeper, they produce higher quality work. And people who prefer solitude, who regularly sit with themselves without distraction, almost always develop stronger intrinsic motivation. Because when there's no crowd cheering you on, you have to find the fire inside yourself. And once you find it, nobody can take it away. This is rare. Self-reliance is one of the rarest traits in modern society. We live in a world designed to make you dependent. Dependent on external entertainment. Dependent on social media for your self-worth. Dependent on other people's opinions to feel okay about yourself. People who prefer solitude quietly opt out of that game. They build their self-concept from the inside. They set their own standards. They measure their success by their own ruler, not the one society handed them. And that is extraordinarily powerful, because the person who doesn't need anyone's approval to take action, to create, to build, to keep going, that person is unstoppable. That person is you. Trait 5. They think in waves. Most people never will. This last trait is perhaps the most powerful and the most misunderstood. People who prefer being alone think differently, not just a little differently, profoundly, fundamentally, structurally differently. And it starts with something called solitude-induced thinking. The science. When you're alone, truly alone, without screens, without noise, without other people's voices filling the air, your brain enters a fascinating state. Neuroscientists call it the default mode network, a system in your brain that activates specifically when you're not focused on the outside world. And here's what's remarkable. The default mode network is where some of your most creative, original, and visionary thinking happens. It's where you make connections between ideas that seem unrelated, where you imagine futures that don't exist yet, where you ask the questions nobody else is asking. And people who regularly spend time alone, away from constant external stimulation, activate this network far more often than people who are always surrounded by noise and people. In other words, solitude literally makes you think differently. The greatest minds. In history, Isaac Newton developed the theory of gravity while isolated during the Great Plague. He was forced into solitude and used that time to produce some of the most important scientific ideas in human history. Charles Darwin spent years on solo walks, what he called his thinking path, working through the ideas that would become the theory of evolution. Steve Jobs was famous for long, solitary walks where he processed problems and generated ideas that would define Apple. These aren't coincidences. These are blueprints. Solitude isn't where thinking stops. It's where the deepest thinking begins. What this means for you. If you've ever had your best ideas in the shower, on a walk, or lying in bed before sleep, you've experienced this. That's your default mode network. That's your solitary mind doing what it was built to do. And for people who already love being alone, this is on all the time. You're not wasting time when you sit in silence. You're building thoughts that most people will never even have access to. That's not a personality quirk. That's a competitive advantage. So let's bring it all together. People who prefer being alone, people like you, often carry 5 rare traits that the world consistently underestimates. 1. An extraordinarily rich inner world. 2. Unusually high emotional intelligence. 3. A fierce, disciplined control over their energy. 4. Deep self-reliance and internal motivation. 5. A quality of thinking that most people never access. These aren't the traits of someone who is broken, shy, or antisocial. These are the traits of someone who is quietly becoming dangerous, quietly becoming extraordinary. So the next time someone tells you that you're too quiet, too private, too much of a loner, smile. Because they have no idea what's being built in that silence. If this video resonated with you, I want you to do 3 things right now. First, hit the like button. It helps more people like you find this content. Second, subscribe to MillionMindShift. We're building something here, a community of deep thinkers, quiet builders, and people who are done letting the noise define them. And third, share this with someone who needs to hear it, someone who's been made to feel wrong for loving their own company. They need to know the truth. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, protect your peace, guard your energy, and never apologize for knowing who you are. MillionMindShift.